Welcome to Genuine University's webinar on the science of boundless wealth. I'd like to begin by making a fairly bold statement, and that is simply that wealth has very little to do with money. Now, that might seem like a very strange thing to say at the beginning of a webinar on the science of boundless wealth. But I think you'll find as we move through and I present just what I mean by that, that you'll come to be of the same opinion. But first, I'll just talk to you a little bit about what Genuine University actually is. Who are we that are presenting this information? Genuine University is a community of people who we've worked to get in touch with ourselves and taken action on our truth. We care about other people, and we seek to offer real value to the world. And when I say real value, that's what I mean when I say that money doesn't have very much to do with wealth. I'm not saying it has nothing to do with wealth. I'm saying that it has very little to do with wealth. So in Genuine University, we seek to offer real value to the world, and certainly we're going to be putting that across this evening. We courageously rise to worthy challenges and achieve meaningful goals. So that's just, the 30-second preview of what Genuine University is. And just to give you a little bit of an idea about who I am, my name's Peter Haggerty, and I've been coaching since I was quite young. We do have webinars that we've run prior to this one. There are 4 that we've run prior to the webinar on the science of boundless wealth, and I've talked about myself a little bit in those, so I'll skip through these ones pretty quickly. I've been coaching since before there was a term for it, and I've run quite a few different businesses, one of them for over 10 years, and I've been involved in generating income for various businesses and invented various products and created delivery systems for dozens of different businesses. I've done decades of research and study, trial and error on how to uncover what people would love to offer the world, how they can get paid to do it. And this is the core of what the webinar is about this evening, how you can get paid for offering what you love to offer, and also how they can generate sustainable prosperity. And of course, you can't really do those things unless you've got your relationships in order, so that's something that is extremely important. And also, something that you really need to be able to do in order to keep going is actually enjoy what you're doing. They say you can't make money, very much money for very long if you're doing something that you really don't love doing. When I was very young, I had a dream that the world would be even more wonderful if everyone was doing what they loved. And in some ways, I haven't really grown up. I still think that, I'm still going for that, and I'm teaching programs based on that, and I've certainly got a track record of showing people how they can actually make money doing what they love. So here's a photo of me with my newscaster pose, but because fun is so important, here's another photo of me. This is pretty much what I look like a lot of the time. I love doing things that are really enjoyable. But anyway, enough about me, and we'll get into the science of boundless wealth. So firstly, get a little bit technical and talk about what the word wealth actually means. It comes from English words, or Old English words, of wheel, and there's 2 different spellings I've got there. And it basically means prosperity and happiness. So that's what we're talking about when we say the science of boundless wealth. Doesn't mean I'm not talking about money. In fact, there'll be quite some things in this webinar that I think you'll value because of how it helps you understand money better. So this webinar is not actually about making huge piles of cash. Okay, so if you want to come into this webinar and learn how to make $5 million and be wealthier than everybody else, then it's probably not the right place. Although that is not something that I am against. I have a lot of clients who've done exactly that because that's important to them and that's their purpose. But this webinar is not exactly about that. It's about the generation of wealth and how it actually comes about. So I won't be giving you the latest stock tips and internet marketing ploys and all this sort of thing. I'll be talking about the very core fundamentals of wealth itself. The webinar is also not about selling yourself out. It's not about, if you just sell your soul to the right devil, then you can get a good deal and you'll have all of these things and you'll have, 100 virgins or something waiting on your hand and foot, whatever the case might be. This webinar is not about that. But it's also not about bashing the concept of money. We're not here to say, you know, if it wasn't for money, the world would be a much better place. I don't believe that at all. In fact, I believe money is incredibly useful and very, very important, but just not important in the ways that a lot of people think it's important. There's a difference of opinion that I've got there, and you know, I'll talk to you about what I've found to be most useful, and you know, it's up to you to take it or leave it and work out for you what is most useful. So this webinar is about how prosperity and abundance are generated. It's about how we become fulfilled as a result of what we have by appreciating what we have and increasing what we have. There are so many people out there who are simply running around trying to get more of what they're not appreciating. And it might sound insane, but I'm sure that pretty much everybody on this webinar, and I know I've done it to some extent at various times, you run around thinking that if this doesn't work for me, then if I get more of that, then it'll work for me. And you know, in some cases, you know, if you don't have quite enough water to drink, then obviously getting more water is a good idea because then you can sate your thirst. But in many other respects, getting something that isn't actually working for you doesn't really do anything for you at all if you try and go and get more of it. All you do is get more of something you don't want. And we'll talk about needs and wants a little bit later on. So I just want to be really clear that money is not everything unless you don't have enough. Because if you don't have enough money, if you don't have enough ability to actually look after yourself, then suddenly it becomes incredibly important. And it should be, because our basic needs need to be looked after. But we'll get into the needs and wants a little bit later. I just want to put this stat to you, and that is that they say that happiness doesn't really do much for you after you earn about 75,000 US dollars per year. So, you know, that's a nice chunk of money. That's, you know, as long as your needs are looked after, money doesn't really do anything for you. So if you have enough, it's not that important. But it's a bit like oxygen, you know, you don't really think about it until you don't have enough. And ideally, that's how I'd like you to think about money, like you have enough to do the things that are really important to you and then generate real wealth. Now that enough could be a variable term. Enough might be 10 million to one person and $1,000 to the next person. So it's all about individually what is right for you. As you rise above US $75,000 per year, the amount of extra money you earn has almost no effect on your happiness level. Now this is not from information about money itself, but this is from studies about happiness, what creates happiness. We will be talking about that in later webinars because happiness and wealth, although in my mind they're quite related, there is a fine distinction there. And to me, happiness is a feeling of joy, of ebullience and so on, and actually being really contented with your life. But to me, wealth is a lot more active. It's a lot more proactive as well. So, needs versus wants. Now this is probably the most pervasive misunderstanding that I come across in the work that I do. People get their needs and wants mixed up. Most of us in the first world have a warped idea of what a need is. We think a need is a new car. We think it's a new notebook, like a laptop computer, that sort of thing. We think it's having only the latest furniture or the latest fashion, whatever that case might be. We think, you know, oh wow, my needs aren't being met because my iPhone, you know, they've released another version of the iPhone which has a slightly bigger button than the last one or something. You know, and I'm being cynical here, and I certainly know a lot of people who suddenly don't like whatever technology they've got if something better came out a week after they got whatever they currently have. And personally, I don't think that they're going to end up very happy or feeling very wealthy at very, you know, any time in the future. So the list goes on for things that we think we might need in order to be happy and in order to be wealthy. So these things are great and they're exciting, but they only really give you short-term happiness. You don't, I mean, we get that nice high from buying something that we really want or something that is important to us for some reason, but that doesn't last. And then we have to go and buy something else and we start this cycle. So it's great to have wants. It's really important. I'm not saying don't have them. I'm not going to start spouting Buddhist doctrine to you that desire is the root of all unhappiness and so on. I think that, you know, it's they're both one side of the same coin, so I wouldn't worry too much about it. I personally think that going for what you want is incredibly beautiful and wonderfully important and makes life an adventure. But if you get your needs and your wants mixed up, then going for what you want, thinking that it's a need, suddenly becomes a massive drama. And so you don't actually feel content, like you can relax, because your iPhone's not exactly what you think it should be, or the cover isn't right, or you know, your partner doesn't have exactly the muscles in exactly the right place, or whatever the case might be. So, although confusing your wants with needs leads to all sorts of issues that ultimately see you controlled by the latest fad. So if you confuse your wants with your needs, you'll end up being controlled by what some self-appointed authority figure or somebody who is apparently really cool or something tells you that you should get in order to, so that you can be just like them. And you know, maybe they're really happy and all of that according to the tabloids, and then check in on them in 6 months' time and see what the tabloids are saying, because that's usually the cycle that I find. And if you are confusing your wants with your needs, you'll be continually on a treadmill. You'll be constantly going for the next thing and going for the next thing and going for the next thing, and you'll never be able to appreciate what you have, because ultimately wealth, real wealth, starts with gratitude. And if you have your wants confused with your needs, then you won't really have an opportunity to have gratitude. You might think that you've got it because you got the latest gadget or something, and you're, oh wow, I'm so grateful for this, but then suddenly it's not enough. So if you have your wants confused with your needs, you'll never ever be satisfied. Then you'll end up burned out and stressed out, and you'll be controlled by debt. Because don't we love our ability to spend money that we don't have? And obviously spending money that you don't have is not really a way of getting ahead and actually engaging in wealth creation. So being confused about what you want versus what you need is the number one reason people end up out of control of their lives financially, and then out of control of their lives emotionally. And that's the number one reason why it kind of goes in that order. Sometimes you'll find people who are out of control of their lives emotionally are then out of control of their lives financially. It's actually a vicious circle. But being confused about what you want versus what you need stops you being financially responsible, and then you have to deal with the emotions that you're probably trying to avoid in the first place by overspending. So they're going to come whether you like it or not. And we'll talk more in later webinars about how to deal with your emotions and how to manage them well, and you know, how to express them in a way that is truly enriching, whether the emotion is what you might call a good or a bad emotion. So if you're seeking happiness by constantly chasing the next toy, car, gadget, relationship, or house, then you are a slave. So I hate to slap you in the face with that, but if you are ruled by what other people tell you is important, or by the latest fad, or whatever the case may be, then you are effectively under their control. And I see this a lot of the time with people who live for a particular thing and then just go out and do jobs which don't really fulfill them at all, and they feel like they're a slave. It's called debt slavery. I've been calling it wage slavery for a long time. I want to be clear about what needs actually are right now, so that you can kind of get some more clarity on this. And I think that we all do this to some extent. I mean, sometimes I feel like, oh, you know what, I really need this and I really need that. And in actual fact, if I look at what I want to do with my life, I don't need those things at all. And then other times I'll deprive myself of things that I actually do need, thinking that it's just some sort of luxury that I want. Now, where we live is kind of in a wilderness area, and so we're off the grid. And I convinced myself that we didn't need a generator, that wasn't really that important. And so for a long time I deprived myself of having a generator because I thought it was just a want. It was like me just wanting to spend money. And then talking with my partner, she kind of pointed out that, you know, in order to run our business and fulfill our purpose, we do need to have a reliable power solution. Therefore, the generator became redefined as a need, and we fulfilled that. Okay, so being aware of what you really need in order to be healthy, in order to be safe, in order to be part of something, like to have a sense of belonging, and in order to be your best self, and in order to be a good parent, and also to be proud of yourself, is the beginning of freedom. So if you know what you need in order to be healthy, then you are able to disassociate that from a want and just go, you know what, this is a need. This is a very high priority. I need to have reliable nutrition. I need to have the ability to get good rest and so on. I also need to be safe. So, you know, like if you're living in a terrible neighborhood because you want to be near to the center of downtown or the city, then maybe you're not safe. And suddenly you've got your wants and your needs mixed up, and you'll be stressed out, and you'll probably end up in a bad way down the track. We also, as human beings, we need to be part of something because we're social beings. I mean, there are hermits and so on who may have different needs in that respect, but for the most part, we do need to belong. And we also want to grow into something. We want to be our best self. We want to be the best version of us. Very natural. And, you know, whether you want children or not, you might want to also create something. So whether you've got children or you are a creative person and you're bringing something, you're birthing something new into the world or something, then that's part of being a good parent. And also we need to feel good about ourselves. It is really important to have a reason to feel good about yourself. And these are the basic needs. And once you know that these are needs and not actually wants, then you start to become free, because you can then go, you know what, I could go and get these other wonderful things that the TV advertisements told me that I want, but in actual fact it's going to impact the budget that I've got for my nutrition, so therefore I won't do it. So you can separate out your priorities. So I'm just putting on the screen here the pyramid, which is from Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And you can see on the bottom there that we have physiological needs: food, water, and warmth. We have safety needs, security and shelter. And I know, like from doing survival training, that you know, a lot of the time when people do tests, like intellectual tests, asking them, you know, what's the most important thing in a survival situation, they say water is the most important. But in actual fact, shelter is the most important overall, because unless you're in an incredibly pleasant environment in a survival situation, shelter is going to be more important, because a lot of survival situations often end up being in harsh circumstances. So anyway, we need safety, security and shelter. People underestimate how stressful moving house actually is, because suddenly your shelter is not reliable anymore. You're in a new place all of a sudden. You don't know where things are. You go to cook dinner, you're like, okay, I've got to unpack the plates and I've got to do this and I've got to do that. And guess what? Your physiological need of food is suddenly challenged. You can't find the blankets. Your warmth is challenged. So security and shelter is far more important than most people realize. And then the sense of first step towards self-actualization. And self-actualization is like the need to be your best self, or the best version of yourself. That kind of is rooted in the need to belong. And that means connecting with other people. It could be your family that you were born into, like your actual blood relatives, or it could be your family of friends and so on. Like let's say you might have friends that are like brothers and sisters and fathers and mothers to you and so on. You know, maybe you kind of parent some people. So you've got family of origin and family of choice. And also being part of a community, knowing that if you need a certain thing, that you can go and get it, and that other people will come and almost validate you by asking you to help them. And it's very, very nice to be a part of a community. And also we need to feel that we are proud of ourselves. We need to feel that we are worthy of thinking well of ourselves. And whenever we experience shame and so on, obviously you must know that that can be a very challenging situation. And so then from there we can step up further towards self-actualization and being more and more of who we are. And I actually feel that real wealth is about having those things taken care of so that you can then self-actualize and become who you're really meant to be. So that's more of where I'm going with the science of boundless wealth, but that doesn't mean that money is ruled out, because I have an entire program called Make Money Doing What You Love, which is all about how to find what is most valuable within you and how to bring that to the world and deliver it to the world in such a way that they value enough to give you money for, so that you can continue doing what you love doing. So just to reaffirm, I'm not getting all, all bashy on money. I'm not going to start telling you that money is a bad thing. Okay. So, what is wealth? I'm going to give you the Genuine University's definition of wealth in just a moment. And it's actually fairly simple. It's not complicated like most definitions of wealth. If you hear about somebody like the Wolf of Wall Street and so on, I mean, his idea of wealth when he was going after all the money and so on was basically excess. And there was a Greek philosopher named Epicurus, and you may have heard of the idea of Epicurean delights. And the concept of an Epicurean delight is that it's like the best of everything, like your delicacies and so on, all served up to you in an abundant fashion, and there's one after another, and it's just absolutely amazing. Unfortunately, that definition is wrong. Epicurus wasn't really into that sort of thing at all. He was famous for saying, "Give me freedom of thought, a friend to speak with, and a pot of cheese, and I am wealthy." And for him, it was all about the simple things. Freedom to be himself with people that he cared about, and the ability to nourish himself in a way that felt really, really, really nice for him, and having enough to share. So our definition of wealth is the ability to look after yourself and also grow in who you are and grow in what you offer, and also, and this is the part that almost everybody gets hung up on in our modern world, to also grow in what you have. Because, as we progress in life, it's nice to accumulate things. And it's nice to accumulate things that are particularly meaningful to you. And I don't have any issue with that, and I think it's a wonderful thing to do that. Investment's brilliant, and so on. But if it means selling your soul or making yourself a slave in order to get what you think you want because somebody's told you should want that, then I don't think you really have anything at all. Okay, so this definition has little to do with money. There's not really much to it as far as money goes. I haven't mentioned money. I've talked a little bit about what you have. And the reason why it doesn't have little to do with money, doesn't have very much to do with money, is because money is really a symbol. Money isn't really anything at all. It's just a way of measuring something. And we'll talk about what it is, what it measures, and really that's the wealth. It's what money is measuring that is the wealth. If you have a house and you think the house is worth something, then the idea that having a ruler or a tape measure to measure the house and then thinking that the tape measure is where the value is quite ridiculous, right? It's stupid. You might think I'm an idiot even saying something like that. But that's how people look at money. If I've got a big measuring thing and a big pile of stuff that measures something, then I'm wealthy. But what if it doesn't actually represent anything at all? What if it's empty? What if it's meaningless? Then suddenly it's not worth anything. So the definition that I gave you about that wealth is the ability to look after yourself and grow in who you are and what you offer and what you have. I've been really clear that that doesn't really have that much to do with money, because money is not wealth. Money is a measurement of potential. And unfortunately, money can be a terrible distraction from actual value. And you see all these people, especially people who like to do trading for a living, like day trading and so on. And basically, all they're really doing is moving money from one place to another and trying to get an advantage. And I don't see them actually producing anything of any actual value to another person. And I've had a lot of traders try to convince me that they're actually doing something really good with that. But then when I've studied this stuff, I've gone into it quite deeply. If you want to get further into this, you can look at Dr. Alexander Elder's work, who's a psychiatrist, who's also a trader, and he's very, very skilled at kind of pinning down why you're doing trading and so on. And ultimately what it comes down to is that trading is simply a mechanism where money moves from people who are not patient toward people who are patient. And that's all it really is. Nothing's really produced from it. Anyway, I won't go on a little tirade or anything like that. Let's talk about what value actually is. So the real determinant of wealth is value. So something that happens in my country is that we have mobile phones, or what you might call cell phones. And when they sell the plans, they say things like, oh, if you spend $30, you get $450 of value. And I've had people saying to me, oh, this is what you get and so on. And people, salesmen in stores and so on like that, trying to tell me, well, if you come with us, instead of getting $450 worth of value when you spend $30, we'll give you $550 worth of value. And I turn around and say to them, I don't know how much value you're actually giving me, because if you give me twice as much as the next company in what you're calling value in dollar figures, let's say you give me $1,000 worth of calls, but you charge me $5 per minute, then I'm better off going with the other company who gives me $500 worth of calls but charges me 20 cents a minute, because there's more value there. So value is a very relative term. And I get a bit extreme with that example sometimes and say, maybe I could spend $30 and get $5 million worth of call credit. But if they charge me $1 million per minute, then I'm going to have a bit of a problem as soon as I go over that 5 minutes. I'll be in debt. So, it's all relative. So the real determinant of wealth is how much value is actually being delivered. I know once I was looking at buying a computer, and I called up a company. I won't mention the company name, but they were basically a company that was advertising in a credit card magazine. I don't know exactly what they're called, but when you have a credit card, you get rewards points and so on, and then they send out what you can buy with the rewards points. And anyway, this computer company, was basically advertising that if you buy through them, you get 4 times the amount of rewards points. And so I asked them, how much is this computer that I'm looking at getting? And let's say they said $1,000. And I turned around and said, well, I can get that exact same thing from somebody that I know that I bought from before for $700. And then the salesperson turned around and said, yes, but you get like 4 reward points for every dollar that you spend, so that's 4,000 rewards points. Then I went and calculated how many things I could buy with 4,000 rewards points, and discovered that I could buy something worth about $45, which meant that I would end up spending $1,000 and then get effectively $45 worth of something back. which meant that the thing cost me $955 with the rewards points and all that factored into it, whereas I could go and get the same thing for $700 from somebody that I knew, which meant that really there wasn't value there. And people get all caught up with this thing. They'll get caught up with smoke and mirrors about what value actually is. Okay, but we'll go into that a little bit later. I'll go into more of it. If you do not value something, it is not a contributor to wealth. So this whole idea of, selling ice to Eskimos, I mean, firstly, I don't think that's very ethical if you were able to do that, to actually do that. But you can imagine Eskimos don't actually value something. So they say, somebody is such a good salesperson, they could sell ice to Eskimos. And what they're saying is that the salesperson is able to generate the perception of value, even though value may not exist. And we'll go into that a little bit later. But effectively, it's you valuing something that makes something worthwhile, makes it a contributor to wealth. In ancient times, there was little to no value on oil. In fact, it was quite a nuisance. I mean, you can't really farm land that has oil coming up out of it, right? It was a big, big problem in a lot of areas. Whereas now we have a use for it. And because we value it to run our machines and so on, and to produce plastics and various other things, suddenly it has value and it is a contributor to wealth. There's issues with it, certainly environmental issues, but a lot of our economies are actually run on oil. And without it, the ability to get things from one place to another quickly and so on, and the interdependence of our economies would be greatly challenged. And that's a whole other discussion. If you want to go into that and how you can actually get more value by not using oil, then you can look at how Cuba solved the oil crisis and so on. So the point there, though, is that value is what actually contributes to wealth. Real value. It's not money that contributes to wealth. And money, if it is used correctly, is a measurement of value. That's it. And I've had people come to me and say, let's say when I was buying a lot of property and so on, they try to tell me, the property is worth this. Oh, wow, it's worth so much more. Why is it worth that? Because the person next to me is bidding, to a certain degree, which perhaps I'm not willing to meet. And I've actually had real estate agents come to me and say, it's only $2,000, like in order to become the highest bidder. And, basically trying to justify to me that because somebody else is willing to spend this amount of money on a property, that there is value in it. And it doesn't necessarily mean that there is actual value in it. Maybe the person has been duped about how much value there really is. I don't know. I don't know why they're bidding. I also know when I was doing renovations on houses, I would often go to auctions to buy comparatively inexpensive building materials and appliances and so on to go into the property. And the amount of times I saw people bidding on, let's say, a spa bath that retails for $1,800 and they're bidding over $2,500 for it. And the condition that it's in, the packaging is damaged, it's got scratches on it in certain places, and you'll have to do some cosmetic work in order to put it into a house and make the house saleable. But they're just bidding because their perception of what the value is being raised up by an emotional desperation. So there's all sorts of discussions there about whether value is actually being produced or not. So what it comes down to is, what is it going to do and how is it going to serve you? That's the important thing. How is it going to help you to do the things that determine what wealth is according to our definition? How is it going to help you be who you are? How is it going to help you offer what you've got to offer, and how is it going to help you increase your what you have, what you actually own, and so on? Okay, so looking further about what value is, something that really comes back to me time and time again, and I know this is just a movie, probably it might not have happened in real life, but the image in the Titanic movie of the wealthy man trying to buy his way onto a lifeboat. and person who's in charge of, who gets on the lifeboat or not just takes his money and throws it back in his face. Because suddenly, the wealthy man thinks that the value is in the money, and it's actually not. The value is only in what the money can do for you. So money has very little to do with wealth. The real wealth is in what it does. And it can do what it does because it's a symbol, and it's agreed upon symbol. The meaning of money is only worth what the vast majority of people agree it is worth. So if suddenly everybody thinks that the US dollar is not worth much anymore, then guess what? It's not worth that much. If everybody suddenly thinks it's worth an enormous amount of money, then guess what? That's what it's worth. And we'll get into that a little bit later. So in that movie, at least, and certainly in the real life event, I'm pretty sure that no one valued money over their lives. Ultimately, if it came down to it, you'd probably give everything you had in order to continue living if that was what was necessary. There are some people who wouldn't, who have a bit of a odd perception about what value is, and would not give up that money. They'd rather die. It's probably because they don't have a very good understanding of what mortality actually means and what it means when you're dead and so on. You probably can't see beyond that. So, however, if you want to find out what is really valuable to you, money can be a good indicator, because money is worthwhile because of what it can do for you. And what you end up choosing to have money do for you is an indication of what is valuable to you. So for me, having like the latest and greatest computer really isn't that important. As long as it works reasonably well, that's what matters to me. I want reliability. But for some reason, because I spend a lot of my business life on the phone, I want to have the best phone that I can get. And I was disappointed recently because somebody that I was talking to, because we live in a wilderness area, phone reception is really important if I want to run my business from that area. And he told me that the next version of the phone that I've got has far better reception in remote areas. And so suddenly this phone that I've been really enjoying is a whole lot less valuable to me, because I think, wow, how much better tool is that? Whereas the computer is going to operate the same way pretty much anyway, as long as I've got power. So I'm not too fussed about whether or not I have the latest computer. So you can see what's valuable to me because of where my money would go. And it's the same with you. So I'd like you to take a moment to consider the things or areas of your life that are the most important to you. Really just take a deep breath and then let it out, and think about and feel into, let's say, the 3 areas that are the most important to you in your life. And there's probably more than 3, but let's just go with 3 because we're doing a webinar. It's not a full-on course. Three is a good number as well because you can kind of recite it. You don't have to necessarily write it down. So just make a mental note about what is in the top 3. What is most valuable to you? What are the top 3 things that are most valuable to you in your life? Now, starting with whichever one you want to, doesn't have to be in any particular order. Imagine one of those things that are important to you being fulfilled in the ideal way. Have a little fantasy about it. So this thing is really important to you, and you're getting what you want in the way that is most right for you. And entertain the idea that that could happen for a moment. And now move on to the next thing that's important to you, next area of your life that's important to you. And imagine that being fulfilled in an ideal way. in a way that's really meaningful to you. Let it affect you. And now the third one, imagine that once again, like the others, it's being fulfilled, that thing that's important to you being fulfilled in the way that's ideal for you. Not the way that somebody tells you is ideal, just the way that feels really nice, feels wonderful in all these ways. And if you feel the others adjusting, the other ways that you're being fulfilled in other areas adjusting, let them. This is just a few moments just for you. And now, having felt these things, and imagine being fulfilled in the ways that are most important to you, in the areas of your life that are deeply meaningful to you, ask yourself this question. If those things happened, does it make you feel wealthy? I remember once I did some work with a client, and I won't go into the details of exactly what it was about because it's not that relevant, but it was really a breakthrough session, and the person really got quite a lot out of it. And then at the end, when it was a very long session, so the fee was reasonably high because it had been about 3 hours. And he said, I'd prefer not to pay you. And I said to him, I said out loud, oh, okay, that's unexpected. What's that about? And he said, well, I'd rather not give you money. I guess I want to pay you, but I'd rather not give you money if that's okay. I've got something that's really important to me, and because of what you've done for me, I'd like to show my appreciation by giving that to you. And I said, okay. And he took his watch off and gave me his watch, and it was worth easily 10 times what the session fee would be. And that to me was very fulfilling, not because of the amount of how much the watch was worth, but because of the feeling that was communicated through the giving of that. It turned out that a while down the track, I worked with somebody who was doing something which was really incredibly inspiring to me. And they didn't have quite the resources, and I just felt, you know what, I'm going to give this person this watch and tell him to sell it, and then use the resources to go and do. And both of those were both sides of that transaction around the watch were incredibly fulfilling to me. Because one, I got this appreciation of somebody giving me something very valuable to them regardless of what the dollar value was, and then I was able to take that dollar value and help somebody turn that into something magnificent, into a business that really made a difference in the lives of underprivileged people. And so that for me was, very wealthy. I felt, and the point I'm making here is this, I felt as wealthy receiving the watch as I did giving it away, because value was generated in both transactions. I don't feel that I lost. And so I felt wealthy in who I was, in what I offered, and then what I had. So, and the best transactions are where you feel like you've offered something and gotten something, and then it enhances your sense of being. So, what is value? And this is where it gets a little bit esoteric, because I'm bringing it down to really simple stuff. When I say the science of boundless wealth, I mean the real core of it. How does it really work? And if you understand this, then it'll protect you from getting ripped off. There's a saying, this might help you to some extent. There's a saying that that I have, which is if you think that you're going to get something for nothing, you'll end up getting nothing for something. And that goes on along the lines of if somebody is trying to engage you in a deal of some sort by activating your greed, by greed I mean trying to get something for nothing, not offering value in order to receive value. If somebody is trying to get you involved in something by activating your greed, watch out. Because what you're going to get is a very valuable lesson in the importance of value. Okay, so what is value? We'll go into this. Value is simply the placing of resources where they are needed and wanted. That's it. It is that simple. So I've got a picture of banana cake here. Now, imagine that we've got, there's an old kind of exercise where we learn about, creation of economies and so on. I learnt this so long ago I can't remember where I learnt it, so forgive me if I'm not giving credit. It's great, whoever came up with it. So, imagine there are groups of people who live on different islands, all very near each other. One island has flour, another island has butter, another island has milk, another island has bananas, and another island has eggs. Now, if these people can't get from one island to another, then their ability to actually have a varied diet is quite limited. But as soon as they take fullness and move it to emptiness, or take resources where they are bountiful and move them to where they're needed and wanted, then suddenly they can do all sorts of things. So if all these islands can communicate with one another and interact with one another, then they have the ingredients to make a banana cake. So instead of getting up in the morning and having flour as breakfast, lunch and dinner, you've suddenly got the option of having banana cake. Instead of just having eggs, breakfast, lunch and dinner, you've got banana cake. Instead of having milk, breakfast, lunch and dinner, you've got banana cake, and so you see. So basically we take the different items and combine them together in such a way that we can create something that is more valuable than each of the items on their own. And I believe it was Aristotle, correct me if I'm wrong, who said the sum of the parts is greater than the whole. So in other words, all those different items, the value that they've got on their own is only a certain amount of value, but combine them together and it is far more valuable than each of the parts individually stacked next to each other. So when we combine emptiness with fullness, then we get value. And so basically value, the placing of resources where they are needed and wanted, is moving fullness to emptiness. And that's it. And that's a very Eastern principle. My understanding of it actually came about not through economics or anything like that, but through studying a form of Eastern medicine. So it is very simple, and it is so simple that we are almost always doomed to forget it. And we get all complicated about things. And I know when it came to trading property and so on, something that helped me a lot was remembering this very simple explanation of what determines the price of a property. And so I test people sometimes and say, what is it that determines the price of a property? And you get all these complicated answers such as, well, proximity to schools, shops, transport, chance of employment, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And there's all these different indicators, and these are important. But then if I say, okay, if you only had 2 indicators to help you determine the price of a property, what would they be? And you get the answers like, well, probably transport. Oh no, they go, oh no, probably, oh no, they don't have kids, then transport. I have to be employment. And you get all these people start arguing about it. But if you get down to the core principles about what determines the value of a property, it's this: what the seller will accept and what the buyer will pay. That's it. It's incredibly simple. Now, what the buyer will pay is determined by the buyer. If the buyer doesn't have kids and never plans to have kids, proximity of schools, if there's schools really close, probably push the price down, especially if they don't like kids. Right? I mean, there are people there who just really find them incredibly irritating. That's going to push the price down, whereas, you know, the pundits will tell you, well, that pushes the price up. And guess what? In that person's case, that's wrong. It doesn't at all. What if the person's independently wealthy? The chance of employment, you know, near the property is irrelevant. So it all comes down to two things: what the seller will accept and what the buyer will pay. Everything else falls into subcategories of those two things. And here's one thing, like a little pet peeve of mine, is sellers expecting you to pay extra because of their fond memories of certain things in a property. And I've actually had people try to tell me that I should be paying more because of their fond memories. And I don't mean to be harsh or anything like that, but I turn around and say, well, hang on, if I'm paying extra because you have fond memories of this and that, what am I actually getting? I'm not seeing what I'm getting here. Yeah? So what they are willing to accept is higher because of their fond memories. But they shouldn't then expect the buyer's perception to meet them, because the buyer's perception is completely different. I, as the buyer, don't have any fond memories. I might be looking to create them. Right? If they say to me, you know what, there's a great wilderness area just down the road and you can take your kids down there and have a great time, then yeah, I'm willing to pay for that the fond memories that I'm going to create. Suddenly my perception is different and I'm willing to actually pay for that. And in fact, there was one property that I bought because of exactly that reason. And I went, let's say, I think it was about 8% higher than what I was planning to pay, because I intended to live in it. So we'll move along. And this is what I've been getting to. Value is rooted in our perception. Leonardo da Vinci said that all our knowledge has its origin in our perception. So it's what you perceive as being valuable that effectively makes it valuable. And this is where the smoke and mirrors can kind of get you into trouble, because you can think that something's really nice, and then it turns out not to be. But you need to act upon your perceptions. Also, I remember years ago, because I'm not, that fussed about whether I've got the latest computer or not, I remember I was in a business, and my business partner said to me, do you want to use my computer to do this presentation? Because I was doing like a PowerPoint presentation. And I said, no, I've got it on my computer, it's fine. And he turns around and says to me, look, would you please use my computer? And I'm like, well, why? I'm not familiar with your computer. And he goes, your computer is ugly. It's horrible. It looks like it's falling apart. And I'm like, well, that part, there's one part of it that's not very sturdy. And he said, I feel embarrassed when you get up in front of people with this computer that's obviously at least 5 years old. And I'm like, yeah, it's lasted a really long time. I was really excited about how long this computer had lasted. And he was embarrassed for me that, or for himself being my business partner as well, I guess, embarrassed that I was presenting with this computer. So then I said, don't worry, I'll take care of it. And I effectively changed the perception of the people that I was presenting to by talking about the computer and telling them about the discussion that I'd had with my business partner and how that represented my values. Similar stories around my choice of cars and so on. So, what's important to me is not necessarily important to others. And it's my perception of what is important that creates value for me. And it's your perception of what is important that creates value for you. And so I'm very much against having the media tell us what is important to us, because that's the way that you end up becoming a wage slave or a debt slave, where you're stuck under all of this debt because you've been constantly chasing something and being on a treadmill. So how do we create value? So value starts with something very basic and with very little dollar value. We've got a picture of some dirt. Right? Now, dirt doesn't really represent much value to many people. That I'm going to use this as an example, and it's not actually about the dirt, but that's where we start. I'm going to use this as an example of how value is created. I used to have another example, but it takes a little bit too long for a webinar like this. It does get the point across, but that'll be in the Making Money Doing What You Love course. So we start with some dirt and we add something to it. And you'll see there we've got a potato which is kind of suspended in some water and is growing a few little sprouts and so on coming out just there. And then we tend to it and appreciate it, and we do something with it that's going to generate more value. We lend something of ourselves to what we are producing. And you can see there's some potato plants growing. I didn't actually know that they grew potato plants. I thought it was all underground, but you know, I'm not actually a fully fledged farmer. And once we do that, we're adding our value and we're doing something. We're taking one resource, which is a potato, and we're adding it to another resource and probably adding other resources like water and so on, and the value of our efforts and attention. And then soon we have something of value to offer to others. And so we take something that has potential in it and we enable that potential to be realized. And it's through our focus that we can do that. And we may decide to add even more value by refining our offering. So then the potatoes go somewhere, and you know, I think potatoes are great like that, but other people find more value in potatoes in different forms. So it's our effort to change the form of something that actually creates more value, because we're changing it into a form that is more useful. And we're also changing the way people perceive it. And you can see there that we've got potato chips being made. And then before long, they end up in a truck, and the value of them in the truck is a whole lot more than when it was, you know, sitting in a glass of water just producing some sprouts and so on. And then on the store shelf, it's worth quite a bit. And apparently, in the United States, a pound of potato chips costs 200 times more than a pound of potatoes, simply because of processing and refinement. And actually, you know, personally, I'm not that big a supporter of potato chips because I don't think they're as healthy as actual potatoes. But the fact is this: people out there value them a whole lot more than the actual potato. And they value them a whole lot more than the dirt that they go in, and water that gets poured on them, and so on. And so you can see each stage along the process, there is an increase in value. And it's simply by people changing the form so that it serves what is important to people more and more faithfully as it goes forward. And you can look at this like if you had iron ore. I mean, the actual amount of uses for raw ore is not very high. But take that and refine it, suddenly the value goes up by 3 or 4 times. Take that and you've got some iron, and then put that with some other metals and make steel and so on, and suddenly it's worth about 400 times what it was. Take that and then, you know, put it into paper clips or something like that, and instead of just a lump of rock, which might be at best a paperweight, is suddenly used to organize, you know, documentation for vast organizations and so on, and create symmetry and create efficiency and so on. And so this ore is serving a purpose which is far more valuable to us as human beings than it otherwise would if it was just in the ground. The same thing can be said, you know, like, you know, the process for turning sand into gold. I don't know if you've heard this one, but the idea is, you know, it's not really being turned into gold, but if you take sand and refine it and turn it into computer chips, it is worth as much as its weight in gold, because computer chips are incredibly valuable and we use them. I mean, we're all using them right now listening to this webinar. So we're using sand. I mean, if we got sand and tried to somehow run a webinar, I mean, running a webinar on the beach would be nice, but let's say we just tried to get that sand and somehow transmit that all over the world to run a webinar. I mean, it's completely useless, right? You'd be an idiot trying to do that. But changing it and using it, you know, putting electricity through it and connecting it all up and having wires and so on, you know, other things that basically change the form of it dramatically increases the value. And so you create value effectively by adding your efforts, the fruit of your labor, to things and to situations and circumstances that fulfill voids. So people are having trouble communicating. So you get some sand, make some computer chips and etc., and combine it with other elements and so on, and suddenly the world is a much smaller place because of some sand and some copper and insulation and electricity and so on. Right? These basic elements, suddenly we're able to communicate as a species so much more effectively because the void of our communication, our wanting to communicate and connect, has been filled through changing the form of these basic items into things that can actually serve us to fulfill our voids. Now, voids is basically what is missing. We talked about that a lot in the first webinar, Demystifying Purpose, and then in the Make Money Doing What You Love introduction. So we move surplus to fulfill deficits. So we move fullness to emptiness. And value is created from voids to serve values. And I'll talk about how value is created from voids in just a moment, using the story of Jim and Giovanni, and I'll also give you another example straight after that kind of simplifies it a little better. But okay, so we've got two kids, one named Jim and one named Giovanni. And let's assume that Jim comes from a family where everybody is incredibly social and there's always people visiting and there's always people talking and laughing and carrying on and having parties, and there's a party every weekend or second weekend and sometimes during the week. And, you know, he's wanting to get some time to himself because what's missing for Jim is alone time. So what's creating a value for him? He values alone time because he doesn't have alone time. So it's a void. There's emptiness there. It's not there. He doesn't have the alone time. Therefore, a value is created from it. And that's basically how values are generated. They're generated from nothing, from emptiness. On the other hand, we have Giovanni, whose parents, let's say they're career-minded people, and they only have one child, and generally his babysitter is the TV. So he spends a lot of time alone, and he's missing a lot of human contact. So his value is having human contact, and that's generated because it's not there. The void is lack of human contact, therefore the value is human contact. Right? It's all very nice and logical, right? You will forget this because it's so basic. But if you keep on coming back to it, you'll understand. And I know I've been doing this for decades now, and I still sometimes forget it. I forget it in my marketing, I forget it in my communicating. I think I do it a whole lot better than the average person, but still there's a forgetting of it, because how can you remember an emptiness? What is there to remember? It's only the fullness that you actually remember, or the perception of it. Therefore, remembering or understanding what generates values can be quite daunting because it comes from nothing. And with nothing, there's nothing to hold on to and remember, so there's a tendency to forget. So, coming straight back to Jim and Giovanni, Jim has a value on alone time, on quiet time, because he doesn't get that. Giovanni has a value on human contact and togetherness, because he doesn't get that. Now, these two could be great friends. Let's say they go to the same school. Giovanni happens to go to Jim's house one day, and everybody, you know, he walks in and he gets 5 hugs from different people. And they're all like, oh, come here, and they start feeding him, and so on. And, you know, maybe the TV is on, but you can't hear it because everybody's laughing and carrying on and having a great time. And Giovanni loves this place. Jim might be a little bit jaded by it, but at least he gets to have a bit of isolated contact with Giovanni here and there. So his value is served to some extent. But what would really work for Jim is when he goes to Giovanni's house and there's nobody around and they can actually hear the TV. So they get alone time. Maybe it's with Giovanni, but, you know, at least there's just one person there. So you can see that there's a richness in the friendship because each other's values are being served. And it's wonderful. And the values are generated from voids. So to explain this about values being generated from voids a little bit more clearly, imagine that you have a big screen TV. Now, I first started doing this actual example when a big screen TV was a pretty big deal. Like, nobody had them. We still had the, the thing with the cathode ray, CRT, cathode ray tube in it. And, your TV wasn't anywhere near flat because it was as deep as it was wide, at least, because of the CRT. So imagine you've got this big screen TV and you are absolutely loving the experience of watching your TV on a big screen TV. And then one day you come home and it's gone. Suddenly your value of the TV is greater because you liked it, you may have taken it for granted, and then when it's gone, you wish it was there. And so it's not actually the TV being there that creates the real value, it's the TV not being there that creates the value, because you want to fill that. You want that void to be fulfilled, therefore you have a value for that thing. So here's a bit of a, it screws you the mind a little bit. It's the not the TV that generates the value. The TV doesn't generate the value. It's the absence that generates the value. When you're in the shop considering buying something like that, it's the fact that you don't have it that makes you want it. If you had that in every room of the house, why would you want one? The value on it is a whole lot less. And so basically voids are what generates value. It's the nothingness and the emptiness which generates what we want to engage with others. And so now we're going to get really strange. I'm going to talk about a concept that I came up with quite a while ago, and I just want you to bear with me a little bit for this because it sounds pretty bizarre, but I want to use it to illustrate a really important concept straight after it. So if you just bear with me on this one, because we're going to talk about a shop that sells nothing. So imagine there's a shop and there's a whole lot of people lining up outside, and people go into the shop and they get to the top of the queue and they say, "I'd like some nothing, please." And then the person behind the counter says, "Great, here you go," and hands over nothing. And then the person who's paying for it says, "Here's the money, thank you very much." And then they leave, and the next person says, "I'd like some nothing, please." And then the person in the shop hands over nothing, and then they say, "Thank you very much," pay for it, and leave. And then this goes on and on and on. Now, with this bizarre concept, imagine this, or actually answer this question. Would that shop run out of stock? It can't run out of stock because they're selling nothing. There'll always be a never-ending supply of that. As long as their shelves are empty, they're fine. Right? Bizarre. And herein lies, that sort of business would be highly profitable as long as there was a demand for what they're selling, because the supply is never ending. And for those of you who are into metaphysics, you probably have a bit of an idea of where I'm going with this, because ultimately everything is generated from nothing. Kurt Vonnegut says, everything is nothing with a twist. And for those of you who might be listening to an audio recording of this, he's got a drawing of a circle there that says everything is nothing, and then it's twisted so that it makes the infinity sign. It's nice, just like kind of like a play on words, or more of a play on symbols. But you get what I mean. So I'm not expecting you to draw too much from that example about the shop that sells nothing, because now I'm going to flesh it out. Right? I asked you to bear with me so that we can get to this next point. When you are providing value from your values, it's almost as though it doesn't cost you anything, because your values come from voids. They come from emptiness. So what is valuable to you comes out of nothing. So you are effectively creating something valuable from nothing. Right? Sounding pretty bizarre? Well, this is the science of boundless wealth. This is the core of it all. It is what is missing that creates the perception of value, which then enables you to provide fullness to someone else who also has the perception of it being missing. So when you're providing value from your values, in other words, you have values around certain things. Let's say we have Jim, who values alone time. He might end up running some sort of retreat, like something out in the woods where people can go to be alone, because he understands the importance of that, and he becomes an expert on providing that because it was missing in his life. Therefore, he knows everything that he wants in order to fulfill what was missing, and he becomes an expert on how to do that because of what he didn't have. Now, for some of you, I might be boggling your mind. For others, I might be repeating myself way too much because it's incredibly simple for you. But this does bear repeating, even if you think you're getting it, because there's the tendency to forget it. So when you're generating value according to your values, quite a few things happen. And this is what happens, and you will remember this from the last webinar even. I went through this in a different fashion, but I want to reiterate it because it's so important. When you provide value according to your values, you find that time passes quickly. So if Jim is providing a retreat for someone, he would probably find that he could do the work needed to do that without realizing time is passing. If Giovanni was providing a party venue for someone because he liked there to be a whole lot of people around, he'd probably get lost in the party. Like he'd probably be going, having a party and then going, why is it bright outside? Oh my God, the sun's up. I have no idea what time it was, because time passes quickly. You'd also find that when you're providing value according to your values, that your energy is renewed by doing it. You almost feel as though you are being innovated, invigorated, energized because of giving something. And this is the strange thing. You're giving of yourself, yet you feel you're receiving in the giving. Where is that receiving coming from? Well, it's coming from the void, because the void generates value. Crazy stuff. And when you're providing value according to your values, you automatically undertake necessary tasks. You do what needs to be done, because it's important enough for you that the things which other people might find inconvenient or a problem aren't really that much of a problem for you. And you can also garner the resources that you need. You seem to be switched on to opportunities that are going to give you what you need in order to do what is most important to you. And you can also clearly master the details of what needs to be mastered. It's almost as though, and this is one way that I find out whether people are actually working in their values and whether they're on purpose, I ask them the details of what it is that they would like to undertake. And they may not have written anything down, may not have studied anything, may not have actually realized that they've ever done anything about it, but almost unconsciously they've been going through the details in their mind because it's what's valuable to them. But because it comes from the void, there's nothing for them to kind of realize that it's happening, because it's happening in an emptiness, and there's no way of relating it. It's only when we do take what is valuable to us from the void and then relate it to others that we can actually see what is valuable there. When you provide value according to your values, you can clearly see the outcome. You know, you have a vision of it. It's almost as though when you see that vision, although it might be in the future, you get a body sense that it's happening right now. So for me, with building Genuine University, we're only in the beginning of this. I'm not even letting people pay to be a part of it yet. That's how fledgling this project is. But when I think about it, I think about in 3 years' time how many people are going to be, being in touch with each other through the network and so on, and creating enormous amounts of value by effectively taking fullness and serving people's voids and so on with that, and taking it to the emptiness. So I can clearly see the outcome of Genuine University. It's plain as day. I have such certainty about where it's going to go. That's because it's in line with my values. When you provide value according to your values, your internal dialogue is about your endeavor. You're talking almost like having conversations with yourself about what it is and so on, what's happening, what you need to do here, and weighing up the pros and cons. And your talk on the outside, when you talk to other people, you tend to go on about it. I know I've actually found myself late for things sometimes if people ask me, what is Genuine University about? And I go, blah, 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 blah. I have to stop myself from carrying on about it. I might actually run a webinar about what it actually is, just for my own enjoyment. If you want to, it can be available if you want it. Okay. When you provide value according to your values, you tend to tackle obstacles readily. And it's almost as though you convert problems into challenges by going, you know what, I don't see a problem, I see something that's going to help me grow, and I'm going to just take that on. You also organize yourself very effectively. So many people that that tell me that they're really disorganized, I turn around and ask them what their values are, and then when they tell me, let's say their values are on bike riding and so on, I then say, oh, are you organized with your bike riding? And they go, of course. What do you mean? Whereas 5 seconds ago, they might have told me that they're not organized anywhere in their life. When we're organized, one way of knowing what your values are is when you look at areas of your life that are actually organized, and more importantly, areas of your life where you assume everybody is organized. You don't even see that people don't have it together. Okay, when you provide value according to your values, you naturally set goals and milestones. You kind of got it done. This whole thing of doing formalized goal setting, it can be important, but it works more effectively to set goals that you're convinced you want in your head but aren't really related to your heart. When you've got a goal in your heart and something's really important to you, then you naturally set goals and milestones. You don't even have to think about it. Also, when you're providing value according to your values, you're willing to do what others will not do. And don't we love to go to a service provider of some sort who just goes the extra mile? I mean, I know I have a great mechanic who literally goes the extra mile. I mean, he drove 50 kilometers out to our farm to have a look at a car for us because he's all excited about, what might be wrong with it. And he says, I can fix anything. It's like a big challenge. He does what others won't do. He's like, I've got a bit of spare time. I go out to Peter's place and have a look at that car he was telling me about. So there's a very good example of doing what others won't do, because I can tell you not many mechanics would do that. And when you're providing values according to your values, you tend to pick yourself up after setbacks and move forward. You don't let yourself get defeated, or if you do, it's just really it signifies that you need a bit of a rest and recovery, and then off you go again. And life seems to bring you what you need in the form of strengthening challenges and fortunate support. So sometimes, we're going for what's important to us. What we want to give to the world, and it gets really hard. And then later on, we look back and go, wow, I'm glad I had those hard times, because now I'm able to deliver this, that, and the other to people a whole lot better than I otherwise could. It was later that I was working with who made jewelry, and she went through a very hard time because she was basically selling jewelry in such a way that minus, pardon me, I was playing with my microphone for some reason. She was constructing jewelry in such a way that it took her quite a long time to do it. And by the end of it, when we worked out how much she was getting paid, it was about $4.50 an hour, which is really not enough to live on in the first world, at least. And that was an incredibly difficult time for her. She went through a lot of hardship, and then she was forced to look at what she really wanted to do. And through having that challenge of basically living in poverty for a little while, she then decided what was really important to her, and that she wanted her jewelry to be something that communicated very particular emotions from the giver to the receiver. And she themed it along those lines, and then suddenly she's earning about $80 an hour. which is quite an incredible, almost 20 times the amount. So that challenge for her was exactly what she needed. And then she also had fortunate support in that I kind of turned up and did that work with her at the right time. It was the right person at the right time. And I'm not saying I'm always the right person at the right time, but certainly in that case, indeed. So when you provide value according to your values, you tend to marshal strengths you didn't know you had. And now these strengths that you've got, a lot of them are kind of resting on the edge of the void that you can't really perceive because there's a nothingness there. It's almost like you can't see what's there because there's nothing there to reflect back to you. But when you start expressing from it, you get in touch with aspects of yourself that you had no idea even existed. And you can often inspire others to join you. Now they may not join you as your worshippers or followers, but they might be allies along the way. And later on I'll give you a quote from a guy named Charles Eisenstein, who I find incredibly inspiring. And you could say in some ways that I have joined him. I have a saying which is that one of the best ways of achieving your purpose, one of the best ways of enrolling people in your purpose is to enroll in theirs. And I certainly feel like enrolling in his because you'll get a bit of an idea. So he's inspired me to effectively join him, and I have a feeling it's going to be mutual once I present Genuine University to him. When you're providing value according to your values, you also set an example for others. You almost set like a benchmark. So that's the gist of how boundless wealth is created. And it's boundless because it comes out of nothingness, it comes out of the void, and you can't run out of that. And I mean, if we look at the universe, it's a really big place. But we're not going to run out of space because space is emptiness. There's a nothingness there. And you can always, if your canvas that you can create an artwork on is space itself, your artwork can just keep going and going and going. And it's the emptiness which actually gives you the space effectively to create that artwork. So once again, the emptiness is effectively helping to create value. Now, I want to talk about the current climate that we're in. The current monetary system that creates money out of nothing using a fractional reserve. Now, this is a bit of we're changing tax a little bit here. And you might think I'm going to start bashing fractional reserve and banks and so on, and to some extent I am, but not as much as the conspiracy theorists might have me do. So for those of you who don't know what a fractional reserve is, I'll give you a very simple and quick explanation. Effectively, it is the ability of a bank to say, okay, I've got $1 in the bank, and from that I will loan you $10. So in order to loan you $10, they only need a fraction of what they're loaning you. So they effectively create money out of nothing using fractional reserve. Currently, I feel that there's a tendency, current monetary system has a tendency to create too much out of too little. So the idea is like if I've got $1 as a bank and I'm loaning out $10, then I only need 90% of that to be paid back in order to justify it. Because I've sort of like the dollar as my insurance. But if I loan out $100 based on $1, then suddenly the fraction of how much I've got in reserve compared to what I'm loaning out is vastly increased. Instead of 10 times, it's 99 or 100 times. And the risk becomes greater, and this is why we had the Fannie Mae collapse in the US and the global financial crisis. Now I've got a picture here with Gene Wilder when he's in the original Willy Wonka movie. It's one of those ones that goes around the internet with different things on it. And he says, oh, the world is $40 trillion in debt. Please tell me who the world is in debt to. And there's another one like that. It says, are we in debt to Jupiter? And, they're actually, it's funny that they have that one because when they say, are we in debt to Jupiter, they're going along the lines of the people that are trying to rule the world, and the conspiracy theorists say the people that are trying to rule the world, they actually worship Jupiter and not the sun. It's a kind of there's a whole lot of occultish stuff behind it, but you don't need to worry too much about that. So the idea that there's all this debt that we can never pay back is where the concern is. If you can't pay back the money that's been created effectively out of nothing on the fractional reserve system, then the money, not only is it not real to start with, but it never can be real. It can never be justified by actual value. Now, the ability for the bank to loan out the $10 based on the $1 fractional reserve is based on the idea that somebody can justify the existence of that money representing some value, but I'll go into that a little bit later. The current monetary system, and here's a quote from Charles Eisenstein. He says, when everything is subject to money, then the scarcity of money makes everything scarce. So if money is the commanding thing that determines how much transaction there is going to be, then having less money means there's less transaction, which means there's less opportunity for people to create wealth by, let's say, trading between those islands. Remember that example with the banana cake? If they can only trade between the islands because there's a certain amount of money floating around, then what will end up happening is that they'll stop trading and therefore there'll be no banana cake. There'll only be the items, the separate items, which is a whole lot less valuable. And there'll be no potato chips, which is the other example that I gave. So when everything is subject to money, then the scarcity of money makes everything scarce. So basically, when you make money the master of the value system, you'll end up with either scarcity on one hand or overabundance, which is unjustified on the other hand, and then you have what they call the bubble bursting. So when everything is subject to money, then the scarcity of money makes everything scarce, including the basis of human life and happiness. And this kind of takes us to that whole money is the root of all evil thing, which is a misquote. The actual quote is that the love of money above all else is the root of all evil, because money is really important. It enables us to trade with one another instead of having to barter constantly. It's far more efficient. It makes the transaction more efficient, and there's a lot more banana cake to go around. So when the basis of human life and happiness is restricted by money being the master, and when that is restricted, that creates slavery. And it says, such is the life of the slave, one whose actions are compelled by threat to survival. Perhaps the deepest indication of our slavery is the monetization of time, the whole idea that time is money. Now for me, like I've made good amounts of money in my life and then gone and taken 5 years off and done things like that because I refuse to have money be worth my time and time worth money. So the current monetary system, I also want to talk about what's great about banks. Banks invest in you. When they're using the fractional reserve really nicely, they can be seen as an ally. I mean, let's face it, they enable a lot of us to buy houses that we otherwise couldn't possibly afford. And the way that we're able to do it is that the bank is effectively taking evidence that they can gamble giving us all this money to buy a house because of our ability to go and produce value for an employer or customers in our business and so on, which we're creating that value. Where's that coming from? Virtually out of nowhere, basically by us doing the same thing the bank is doing. Fractional reserve. Oh, I only have a certain amount of capacity to produce value right now, but over the next 20 years I'll produce all this value. So please create it for me now so that I can buy that house. Great system, right? It works, and it works really well. So I just wanted to kind of finish off with a bit of a discussion about the current monetary system and how fractional reserve works and how it can be a wonderful thing, but when it's overused or when money becomes a master of the system, it tends to fall apart. Basically, part of what I'm wanting to do with Genuine University is start us moving towards what I would call a value economy, where our economy is based on actual value produced. And I can go into a lot of that stuff, but we're running very tight on time. And I can't stand the idea that because you move money, which is a symbol, from one place to another, that it changes in value. Rubbish. It doesn't. It changes in perception, and it's smoke and mirrors, and it's ultimately worthless. When it symbolizes something being done which creates value for people and enriches their lives, enables them to be themselves, enables them to offer what they love to offer, and enables them to actually have more things in their life that really do enrich their life, instead of just numbers in a bloody bank account. It's what the numbers can do that's what's valuable and nothing else. So what we're actually offering in Genuine University, one of the courses that we'll be offering once we go into the kind of like the paid membership area is called Real Results. And initially we're offering free public webinars. We're going to be, and this is one of them, educating people on purpose, realization, making money doing what you love, self-mastery. And there's 38 webinars being held between May this year and February 2015. They're free and they'll be recorded. This one's being recorded and made available to everybody. But the real value in Genuine University is, let's say that you have something that you want to offer the world. The network itself will challenge you to do that, challenge you to bring your value out of the void and then offer it to the world in a way that produces real value and helps us bring about a value economy, value-based economy. So if you imagine being connected with a group of like-minded people who are committed to supporting you in the right way, challenging you in the right way, to help you follow your truth, to generate sustainable prosperity. That's what the Genuine University Network and the Real Results program is actually going to be about. The Real Results is the first program that will be available to members only, and it will teach you how to support others in their journey and also how to receive support yourself. It'll challenge you to engage, it'll challenge you to engage in challenges that engage your mind, open your heart, that scares you a little and excites you. My daughter came up with a really wonderful word for that, but unfortunately I've forgotten it right now. I'll have to ask her. And it also teaches you to undertake these challenges yourself. And the network is something that gives you incredible leverage. I mean, Archimedes is quoted as saying, if you give me a lever long enough, I did this last time, screwed up the end of the presentation. Archimedes said, if you give me a lever long enough and a fulcrum on which to place it, I shall move the world. And that's effectively what Genuine University will enable its paid members to do, is to give them a longer and longer lever so that they can change the world in the way that they want to change it, simply by serving it from their real truth. So thank you for joining me with the Science of Boundless Wealth webinar. The next webinar, which will be on next week, is simply about being yourself. Because it's easy to say be yourself, but it's a whole lot harder to actually do it. And I'll be giving you some tools to do that a whole lot more authentically and powerfully next week. Thank you for being here.